Okay, good evening and good afternoon, good morning in your parts of the world. My name is Father Anthony Leduc. I'm a priest at the Society of the Divine Word, and presently I'm the Executive Director of the Asian Research Center for Religion and Social Communication, or ARC for short. Welcome everybody to the 12th ARC International Roundtable, for the first time organized online. ARC was established in 1999 and is based at St. John's University in Bangkok, Thailand. ARC aims to promote research and dialogue in the fields of religion and social communication, with emphasis on the Asian religious and cultural context. ARC was co-founded by Father Franz Joseph Eilers, SVD, and he was also its longtime executive director until his passing in January of this year. As we begin our online roundtable today, we take a few moments to remember Father Eilers. We pray for his eternal rest and pray for the success of our events today and tomorrow. Kenneth?
Okay, hold on.
I would like to introduce Professor Chainarong, Monthienvicha, who along with Father Eilers co-founded ARC in 1999 and is presently ARC's chairman of the board. He will say a few words about Father Eilers, a luminary in the field of social communication. Professor?
Thank you, Father Anthony. Hello, everyone. First of all, I would like to join Father Anthony to warmly welcome you all to this 2021 Roundtable of Asian Research Center for Religion and Social Communication. We greatly anticipate of what we expect will be an exciting and productive discussion of a contemporary concern on religious communication during and post-coronavirus pandemic. It is also important for me on this occasion to tell you briefly about Father Franz Joseph Eilers, SVD, who founded with me the Asian Research Center for Religious and Social Communication, or ARC in short, 22 years ago at St. John's University in Bangkok, Thailand. From the beginning, Father Eilers clearly made sure that ARC, when it meets as a round table, would not be confined to any single religion, but unlimited to Asia, the continent with the cradle of most world religions. In addition to his great contribution in promoting academic research and interreligious dialogue in the field of religion and social communication in the Asian context, through his 20 years of running the ARC as the executive director, Father Eilers was widely respected for his scholarship in the field of social and pastoral communication, with numerous published books and articles. Earlier, Father Eilers served as the executive secretary of the Federation of Asian Bishops' Conference, or FABC, Office of Social Communication, director of Catholic Media Council, or CAMICO, in Aachen, Germany, and as consultant to the Holy See's Pontifical Council for Social Communication. Father Eilers was also a highly esteemed lecturer, having taught at numerous academic institutions, including the Pontifical Gregorian and Salesian Universities in Rome, Divine Word School of Theology in Tagaytay, the Philippines, the Pontifical and Royal University of Santo Tomas, or UST, in Manila. He retired from teaching at UST in 2018 at the age of 86 and handed over his ARC leadership to his successor, Father Dr. Anthony Leduc, who co-authors this tribute with me. Father Eilers, who passed away early this year, often said that quite several studies and books have been published on religion and social media. He, however, added that hardly any of these publications and books consider the situation of Asia and their challenges in a special way. And therefore, I would like to invite all of you that in loving memory of Father Eilers at this 12th round table, let us go in depth into this field. I wish you all to have fruitful, open, and intellectually stimulating discussions over the next 2 days. Thank you for your attention. สวัสดีครับ
Thank you, Ajahn Chainarong. And next, as the present director of ARC, I would like to say a few words as we open our conference and before we start listening to our presenters. Let me just share my PowerPoint a little bit here. Friends, religious communication is an essential part of human life. Whether through images, spoken words, written texts, or actions, whether in analog or digital forms of transmission, religious communication provides guidance for living, resources to make sense of the ever-changing events taking place in our personal and communal lives, motivation for self-cultivation and transformation, and rationale for our engagement with other people, with the natural environment, with the cosmos, and with the transcendent. Religious communication tries to appeal to the deepest part of the soul, seek out the furthest recesses of the mind, and compel every muscle of the heart and the body towards the good. The goal for religious communication is simple: the physical, social, and spiritual well-being and flourishing of humanity in this life and in the next. Religious communication is anthropocentric insofar as it is directed towards the human person and not to trees, animals, viruses, or rocks. It is also anthropocentric in that it takes the human person as the primary center of relationship with self, with others, with nature, and with the ultimate. Nonetheless, religious communication, when successful, can lead to total human self-transformation that not only promotes well-being of the individual, but also all those that exist in the interconnected network of life in the physical universe. Our major religious traditions, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Chinese religions all have resources that in one way or another affirms the interconnected, and many would say interdependent, nature of all beings, from the tiniest microbes to the widest galaxies in the cosmos. Therefore, it is not surprising that in the midst of this ongoing global COVID-19 pandemic, in which the so-called enemy is a virtually invisible coronavirus, one of the tiniest organisms in the universe, religious communication has an essential role in how humanity ought to understand and confront the crisis. Certainly, the content of religious communication should not sound like information that comes out of a local or national governing body, or the World Health Organization, or the Center for Disease Control. It should not sound like what one hears on the evening news, or read like a social media post with recipes for how to prevent infection. Moreover, it should not resemble the antagonistic tone of American cable TV opinion programs. Undoubtedly, religious communication, especially that which is carried out by prominent or well-respected religious leaders, can contain content that would normally be communicated by secular leaders, medical experts, and social scientists. We have seen that oftentimes the same piece of information is received differently depending on who communicates it. But ultimately, religious communicators, in their role as religious communicators, are not political leaders or scientists. The question for us to explore is, what is the nature, purpose, and method of religious communication in regards to the COVID-19 pandemic in the present and in the future? What unique perspectives can religious communication contribute to understanding more comprehensively about the pandemic with its various dimensions: political, social, scientific, psychological, and spiritual? Like many other woes affecting humanity, the COVID-19 pandemic is a complex problem that requires interdisciplinary, dialogical, and dialectical approaches to discover solutions. Indeed, as the world's human population spends the last 2 years and counting obsessively following the pandemic with daily infection counts, deaths, recovery, locally and globally, not to mention all the economic and emotional tolls on society, it might be helpful to ask the questions. Is finding out the source of the virus as important as finding out the source of the many pandemics plaguing humanity at this time? Buddhism identifies for us the plagues of greed, hatred, and delusion. But indeed, there are many others. Is the coronavirus the enemy that we should fear the most and try our hardest to fight, rather than another enemy that is no less dangerous to the well-being of the present and future world? Pope Francis identifies indifference as the enemy that must be battled against in the modern time. For Pope Francis, indifference is a virus that is dangerously contagious in our time, a time when we are ever more connected with others, but are increasingly less attentive to others. Is vaccination in order to attain herd immunity the ultimate method to eliminate an ever-mutating virus? Or should there also be other curative therapies for the ills of humanity? Here, the yogas introduced by Hindu traditions are worth considering. Finally, is pre-pandemic life with our usual ways of traveling, consuming resources, building cities, developing economies, and creating weapons what we are aiming to return to? Certainly, our religious resources would have many things to say about this matter. In short, religious communication in its true form approaches the who, what, when, where, why, and how questions differently from other types of communication. It employs its own sources of information and inspiration, in addition to that available to the secular disciplines. As a result, religious communication should be able to present unique perspectives that are not facsimiles of other fields of communication. The challenge, however, is for religious communicators to understand the particularity and uniqueness of who they are, so that they are able to fulfill their role in an appropriate manner. It is unfortunate when religious leaders and communicators express themselves without being conscious of their identity, leading to the sort of communication that should be reserved for other disciplines. Worse yet, it even instigates social division, heightens interreligious conflict, and perpetuates unfounded conspiracy theories. We hope that this roundtable, organized by the ARC, will contribute fruitfully to the research and dialogue about the COVID-19 pandemic. As the pandemic has shown us that we are all interconnected in how we can transmit the virus to one another, it should also affirm that we can be part of the solution, not only in addressing the immediate concerns of the pandemic, but all the woes in which humanity and nature are confronting now and in the future. I thank you sincerely for your participation, either as presenters or as listeners and discussion participants in this roundtable. Due to the present special circumstances, there is no physical table for us to gather around this year. However, everything is connected to each other in some way. And in reality, there is nothing that is truly isolated from another thing in the universe. Space is one and all-encompassing. We are fortunate that this pandemic comes at a time in the history of the world when, with the help of digital technology and the internet, we are reminded that we still remain interconnected and can still be one. So I thank you again for your participation, and I look forward to the wisdom from our scholars, from our researchers. And before we turn to our first presentation this evening, I would just like to make a short announcement that the book Pastoral Creativity that John Nishan and I edited and was released in June is now available to download free of charge online. Please go to our website and then you can download the PDF version. and there's no charge for this. Okay, thank you very much. I will now introduce our first speaker this evening. Our first speaker this evening is Father Lazar Stanislaus, SVD. He completed his doctorate in missiology at the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome. He was the director of Ishvani Kendra Institute of Missiology and Communications in India. He served one term as the president of the International Association of Catholic Missiologists, and he was also the provincial superior of India Mumbai province. In addition to contributing many articles to different journals and editing books, he offers in theological institutes courses and seminars in missiology, interculturality, and related subjects. At present, he is the General Mission Secretary of the Society of the Divine Word in Rome, and the title of his talk today is Living Interculturality in the Post-Pandemic World. We welcome Father Lazar Stanislaus.
Okay, you are okay now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
All right, okay, good. So thank you very much for invitation as well as to present this particular topic, interculturality in the post-pandemic world. Certainly, we are in the pandemic, but also we are trying to look at ahead, what is the post-pandemic world. That is the topic which we have. So I straight away go to the aspect of interculturality. Now, when we try to understand interculturality, we need also to understand the other terms like monoculturality, multiculturality, cross-culturality, and then internationality and interculturality. I am not going to all these details of those terms. We understand, I believe. So I straight away go into the aspect of interculturality. It is an interaction between diverse cultures, ethnicity, language, religious denomination, and nationality. So therefore, it is an interaction between various cultures. So it is an intentional engagement among cultures for understanding and mutual enrichment. Whereas the other culture, like multiculturality and cross-culturality, may not be intentional. Here, as a Christian community, we are making an intentional engagement so that we want to achieve something. That is why it gives a mutual enrichment process. Therefore, it is a commitment to mutual dialogue. That dialogue really helps us. That dialogue also helps us to understand that we need to be tolerant and also ambiguity. There are many ambiguities we will come across, but then we will not get answers for everything. But that is also the challenge of what we call interculturality. Openness to change and to challenge. That means I, as my own culture, when I interact with the other cultures, that I am challenged. I challenge the other cultures which are not good, which are contrary to the gospel values and so forth. At the same time, I look into my own culture, that which are need to be challenged. So in that particular interactions, what we try to arrive is what we call leading to the transformation and enrichment of all. So that is the way in which we move towards interculturality. There is a transformation of everyone who are in that particular community. Okay. This is a basic thing which I would like to say. Then move on to interculturality as such. Now, interculturality is more than knowing the differences between different ethnic and tribal and national groups, because the diversity is not enough. We need to know also the other elements regarding differences between men and women. Each and every culture has got its own understanding of what we call men as well as women, the cultural patterns, and the way we react to the restrictions, the challenges, and so forth. And then we also understand the personality. There is another element. Of course, there are a lot of theories understanding personality, but then we need to understand in the context of the culture and personality. So that also gives us a challenge, and at the same time makes us also a complex way in which we interact with the other cultures. Therefore, the personality element also need to be considered when we try to understand the cultures. Also, the other element is generations. Generations of the young and old, and then the people who are of different ages. Certainly, that also need to take into consideration as we understand interculturality. It's not the cultural elements has got various ramifications as we really see this. Therefore, also understanding the social political classes in a culture, in a particular realities, that also makes us a kind of a complex world in the sense of understanding our interactions, as well as trying to understand what we call, as I said in the beginning, challenging mutual dialogue, as well as transformation. So it is not that easy as we really see. Certainly, there are also many other considerations we need to understand. But I just want to see this particular diagram now, which is given by this Hammer and Milton Bennett, very shortly to explain. There are different stages of integration and the different stages that in which we grow towards interculturality. These authors have given, first of all, when we meet with other cultures, there is a denial. So that other cultures don't exist, they are bad, or things like that. We miss the difference. We are not looking at the difference. The second stage is we defend ourselves. There is a defense, judging the difference. We try to say they are bad, they are good, there is a difference, and so forth. Then there is a minimization. Once we try to understand, we minimize the differences. Therefore, we de-emphasize the difference and try to really relate, try to understand, try to mutually agree upon, live happily, try to do something. The fourth one is actually acceptance. So the deeply comprehends the difference. We accept the difference, but at the same time, we don't deny the difference. We try to accept and then interrelate much more. And that much more living together will also help in one way towards interculturality. And the fifth one is adaptation. Adaptation, bridging the differences. So here the differences are said, but then we bridge those differences, adapt in one or the other way in my own culture, some of the cultural elements of other cultures, and so forth. And the last, what we call, we come to the integration. So when our cultures really integrate with one another, there is the intercultural process takes place, and that's how we grow. Well, these are the different stages. From the research, they have found out most of the communities, the religious communities, will be somewhere in minimization. We have not really gone. Some of the communities, maybe Christian communities, may be leading to acceptance, but then we have still not reached the adaptation and integration. We are only growing. Some elements we are taking from one to another, and we are growing into this intercultural aspect. Okay. Now, interculturality as a religious value, meaning of interculturality beyond mere coexistence, because we believe the other cultures, we value the other cultures. So there is a religious value attached to this. Only then we will be able to really live and move towards interculturality. There is a personal and social transformation takes place while recognizing one another, the other religions, other cultures, other nationalities. There is a faith-based community. Actually, we try to approach interculturality from our faith. That gives much more the strength and then looking for a transformation. There are also interculturality, which is valued in what you call the world organizations and multimedias and then different other multinational companies, but then they may approach it very differently. But we approach it with a faith. For the sake of peace and harmony, for building the reign of God, promoting God's kingdom, both within the community and reaching out to the others. So that gives an orientation how we move forward. Kittens, one of the famous authors, he gives understanding in this way. The culture may be like A culture. In a community, there will be B culture, there may be C culture, there may be D culture. That means there are different cultures are there. Interculturality is actually creating a new culture. That means taking the various elements and then moving towards one another as one particular community. And then based on our faith and based on the mutual dialogue and enrichment. And that is the way in which we grow in the new intercultural community. Therefore, acknowledge the presence of seed of God in all the cultures. That is the base. Denounce blindness in the cultures when we encounter. We accept the cultures. That does not mean that we accept everything. Both those blindnesses we try to encounter, we try to challenge them. There is a promote mutual enrichment when we understand that only there is a enrichment, a critique among the individuals and groups. That is the mutual enrichment and the mutual challenge. Avoids cultural superiority and also promotes unity in diversity and diversity in unity. And then avoids also uniformity and challenges fundamentalism. Therefore, in this particular post-pandemic world, we are trying to look at this interculturality, what way that we could move further. Therefore, these are some of the challenges we come across actually now in this aspect. Therefore, the synthesis, what we call is a creative tension. John Kirby, one of the authors, says it is a cross-cultural conversion. John Pryor, who is present here with us, one of the participants here, and he says it is an intercultural conversation. Therefore, this cross-cultural conversation or intercultural conversation. We are moving towards intercultural conversation. There will be creative tension, but the tension is actually to understand one another. So I come back to Kittens, some of the aspects of interculturality. Intercultural living is radically different living in an international community. It describes specifically the way we live out our faith discipleship. It is about the quality of relationship. Intercultural living is not a problem, but a challenge. Not theirs, but ours. Impossible in us and them world, but it is only in your we world, that means integrated world, we try to approach a particular society living and so forth. Intercultural living is not natural, but it is possible. Perhaps even we can call supernatural. Faith-based living gives enrichment, not just acquiring new techniques. By acquiring new techniques alone will not help intercultural living. The faith really motivates us to live as well as to look for a transformation. It is not easy, but it is desirable and urgently needed. One culture is not to dominate, that everyone is called to what you call conversion. It needs a full commitment and hard work. Goodwill is not enough. Historically, religious goodwill alone has perpetuated disaster and injustice. Therefore, it requires compromise, maybe compromise when we say not giving up the values, but then understanding tolerance, real dialogue, and a clear and common vision. Intercultural community cannot be built on autocratic, dogmatic leadership. This requires or produces a revolution in life, both new and obligatory. So when we perceive in this line, certainly there is a revolution which takes place. I come to what he calls some of the challenges now, in the challenges in the communities. First of all, it is the prejudices and stereotypes, preconceived ideas and evolutions regarding a group in the intercultural communications. Therefore, there is a country, ethnic, there is a prejudice. In the pandemic time, we have seen the racism, domination of whites, caste privileges in India and other places. So these are some of the things. These prejudices have really blown up. Prejudices sometimes it can be dealt upon, but then it is blown up during this pandemic. Cultural domination. In an intercultural group, the predominant group, also tend to consider themselves as superior. Therefore, there is a nationalism and fundamentalism. We have seen this in Europe, in Asia, or in other places. Self-victimization. This is also another challenge. Sometimes one who suffers from low esteem may easily perceive discrimination and ill treatment, play the role of a victim. So I am treated in this way, I am from minority community and so forth. But then one has to really see what is the real challenge and what is the real problem. Cultural shield, using cultural differences for self-interest. That is simply one says, no, you don't understand this, you don't understand me. So that is a kind of a shielding, not allowing for a mutual dialogue. Majority cultural insensitivity, use of language and practice their customs without any sensitivity to others. And then we had seen this, during this pandemic, insensitivity to the migrants, insensitivity to the poor. And also we have seen the rich countries and poor countries divide, which grows, especially in pandemic time. Rich countries tend to enjoy privileges and an attention, especially with the rules and regulations, vaccines, and so forth. So it is not really geared towards this intercultural community, what we are talking. Therefore, there are challenges in this way too. Of course, cyber world and the attitude of young people, that is addiction often leads astray from your community. Freedom, how to cope up with. There is also another challenge against vaccines or against sharing the vaccine with the others. So, that also tends towards the kind of a egoistic understanding. Christian communities normally do not explode into group fight and violence with cultural differences and these discriminations and so forth. But people may resort to withdrawal into oneself, departure from community, or passive aggression. And these are the challenges, I would say, which is touching us in this time of pandemic. Now, how to build the intercultural community? So I come to the next element now. First talked about the community, intercultural communities, then the challenges, now how to build it. Maybe appreciate our differences. This is one of the ways. Rediscover the dignity of difference and celebrate it. I mean, certainly this is one of the things I could say. Need to rethink the way we think. Sometimes when we interact with the other cultures, there's only dialectical approach, oppositional and exclusive, right and wrong. This particular approach may not be helpful for intercultural approach. It is analogical, complementary and inclusive, finding validity in others. It is not only that you are right and wrong, but then trying to find a kind of an inclusive approach. What is something wrong? What are the aspects which can be accepted? What are the aspects which cannot be expected? And so forth, kind of analogical. share power with the other cultures. This is one of the things I would say today. Give opportunities to the what do you call the weak cultures or the other cultures. If there are different cultures are there, every culture should have some kind of a power in the decision-making process. Otherwise, in the religious communities or religious Christian communities or in the parishes, wherever we are, develop family spirit, developing new culture. And that would be a kind of a promoting intercultural community in a parish or in a community, even with the religious group, anywhere. Culture and personality, I just indicated, there are various theories exist. They are connected. Understanding personality is important for interaction. Deeper study is needed, especially in this element. Of course, it's another aspect itself. There are two things which I am not going to explain much because there is not much time for this. One is to have a proper intercultural community is having intercultural sensitivity. Okay, the ability to develop a positive attitude towards understanding and caring about cultural differences leading to effective intercultural communication. This is important, especially in as we talk in this particular seminar. And interculturality, sensitive person develops 6 personal attitudes. I just read out: self-esteem, self-monitoring, open-mindedness, empathy, interaction, involvement, suspend judgment. Well, this is one lecture itself, so I just move on just to give an indication. The other one also is in another lecture itself, or you can whole day you can deal on intercultural factors. There are 12 characteristics identified as important for improving intercultural relationship. I just to skip on because this is just to show there are ways in which that we could grow. Now I come towards end, the ways for intercultural growth, especially interculturality as a paradigm formation. If we really develop that way, certainly we will achieve much. Seek contribution from everyone, every culture, especially during this pandemic world, who are included or excluded, migrants or the others. Take appropriate risk, working with compassion and concern. Pandemic time, compassion plays a big role to understand one another. Key to this paradigm is a practice of spirituality, deep listening, deep respect for the context in which one does mission, deep contemplation and prayer with those with whom and among whom one works. It goes during the pandemic, it goes post-pandemic, anytime. This is very important in this. So I have 4 or 5 what you call the conversions. Conversion from ethnocentrism, recognizing other cultures, goodness in others, respect and appreciation. Therefore, conversion from ethnocentrism. This is one element which is very much needed as we understand what we call the interculturality. From our ethnocentrism, conversion from egoism, exaggerated individualism, nationalism, fundamentalism, which we experience now and also maybe in the post-pandemic world, certainly conversion from egoism. Conversion also from self-sufficiency, cultural orientation to being open to other cultures, learn other cultures, challenge one's own as well as the other cultures. Therefore, this is another conversion. Conversion from triumphalism to interreligious dialogue. Just I have added 2 more here. This is also, I feel, in the context of the seminar that we need to really look into it. Conversion from consumerism to care for creation. Interculturality, when we live together, certainly we need to look beyond just to know living. Living also contains what is our mission, what we are going to do. Therefore, conversion in this sense too. And this is my last slide and my conclusion. Solidarity. Now, interculturality, if you want to really build, grow in this present as well as the post-pandemic world, the solidarity is important with one another. Pandemic revived the nationalism, racism, selfishness, and gaining personal profit. Fratelli Tutti indicates we need solidarity. Pope Francis calls for solidarity to confront this epochal challenge. Therefore, Pope Francis calls also find a cure for human and socio-economic viruses in our intercultural life and intercultural mission, that we may be able to really go ahead living peaceful as well as joyful community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lazar, and you kept to the time very well. So thank you very much. I'm not going to say so much because there's a lot of questions already for Lazar in the chat box. But before we get to the questions for Father Stanislaus, we will go to the second presentation, and then after the second presentation, we will have time for the questions and the discussion. So now I would like to go to Dr. Joel Cohen. He is a professor at the School of Communication, Ariel University, Israel. His books include God, Jews, and the Media, Religion and Israel's Media, and Israel's Media and Spiritual News, reporting religion around the world. His research interests include religion news, religion and media in Judaism, and nuclear policy and media. And he is the convener of Religion and Communication Working Group of the International Association of Media and Communication Research. And today, Dr. Cohen will be giving us a presentation entitled Rabbis versus Israeli Doctors in the COVID-19 Crisis. So we now listen to Dr. Cohen.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me. Firstly, I'm indeed grateful to Dr. Leduc and the management of the Asian Center for accepting my paper. It brings back pleasant memories because I participated in the International Roundtable at Chiang Mai in 2013. Frankly, although I saw Dr. Eilis, he has also been he was an active participant in the International Association of Media Communication Researchers Working Group on Religion and Communication. Now my presentation, and first of all I would like to say greetings, shalom from the Holy Land, from speaking to you from Jerusalem. Now my paper attempts to examine how an ultra-religious community, a Jewish community in Israel, should we say negotiated, or perhaps we should say failed to negotiate the first months of the COVID-19 crisis, given that there was a conflict between what the rabbis said what they should do and what the Israeli medical authorities said they should do. I want to discuss this research, which was done together with two of my colleagues, who are Dr. Bruria Adini, who runs the Emergency Disaster Medicine Department at the faculty of at the Tel Aviv University, and Dr. Uwe Spitz of the Lev Academic Center, and also the academic advisor at the one of Jerusalem's leading hospitals, Shaarei Tzedek. So as I say, what I want to do is we want to try and look at the dilemma of the flow of communication between, on the one hand, the rabbis to the ultra-Orthodox community in Israel. Let me first briefly, though, before we go into the results of our research, and it was based on 405 interviews with the residents of one of Israel's biggest ultra-Orthodox towns, Bnei Barak, which is near Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv, of course, is almost the largest city in Israel, although Jerusalem is the capital. But before we go into the details of the survey and the statistics, I think it would be helpful if we briefly discuss the Haredi population themselves, the role of the rabbis, as well as the role of the media, which is a rather specialized media, because the ultra-Orthodox Jewish population in Israel are not generally exposed to the secular general media. So I'm going to briefly overview these, and then we'll be able to focus on some of the questions we have here. As you can see, table 1 and table 2 and table 3 in just a minute or so. I think I'm supposed to close this, am I? That's it. So the Haredim are ultra-Orthodox Jews, are very religious Jews, and they many of them study rather than work. The women go out to work. They have large families. They are isolated, if you want, divorced from Western non-Jewish influences in their homes. They account for 10% about of the Israeli Jewish population, and they also to be contrasted with the other 90% of the Israeli population, which comprises approximately of the 9 million Israeli Jewish population as a whole. If the Haredim are 10%, modern Orthodox, as opposed to ultra-Orthodox, and I'll explain this in a minute, the modern Orthodox account for about 20%. The secular Israel accounts for 40%. In the middle, you have about 35%, shall we say, traditional, more selective in their observance. And there, just to add, even though this is a picture in Israel, but so that participants can understand, this is not necessarily representative of the world Jewish picture, because in America, the other largest Jewish center, there are with an 8 million Jewish population, mostly in New York and Los Angeles, but also in other places. Their American Jewry only comprises a very small number of Orthodox Jews, both modern Orthodox and the ultra-Orthodox, only some 10%, and the other two blocks are the Reform Jewish movement, and the conservative Jewish movement. The Reform is about 40% of American Jewry, and 30% are the conservatives. We don't have the time, and it's not of direct relevance to this paper to explain the theological, historical developments over 200 years of the non-Orthodox as opposed to the Orthodox. Suffice it to say, though, that in Israel, the Reform and the Conservatives have a much smaller representation, and they are not formally recognized, at least by the religious establishment, but there's, if you want, a struggle for them to win recognition from the government, which includes budgetary matters. Having said this, let us briefly describe the ultra-Orthodox, and they have their own separate media. They are not exposed to the general secular media. And when we discuss COVID-19, the role of information was very, very important, since whether it's in Israel or in any other countries, the mass communications are a primary, shall we say, channel for the medical authorities in a country to pass on information about COVID-19, which in March and April of last year was a sense of mystery about the nature, and there were no inoculations, and we didn't hear the words Moderna and Pfizer until much later. So the mass communication has a very important role, both in providing information as well as, if you want, comforting, perhaps clarifying certain dozen issues. And so the nature of the Haredi media is given that the rabbis don't want their followers to be exposed. There's a ban on television. They've said many things in the general media, whether it's sexual violence, gossip issues, which they don't want. So over the years, there has developed a separatist Haredi media for this population. Having said that, within the Haredi media, it's important to note there's the development over the last 70 years of the Haredi media, the alternative separatist media, shows some interesting features. And namely, whereas the media, the Haredi, I should say, daily papers were affiliated and are affiliated with Haredi political groups, there has been a reaction to, if you want, a censored type of media. And for the last 30 or 40 years, there's a sense of greater independence among Haredi news magazines, which have developed. Now there are 2 Haredi radio stations and even internet. Internet is a very important matter in looking at the Haredim. The Haredi rabbis imposed a ban on the internet, given that it's uncontrolled and that one has access to all sorts of matters which the rabbis thought not appropriate. Originally, 30 years ago, computers were banned in the Haredi community, but the recognition that the websites and new media are an integral part of modern life has resulted in quite a number of the Haredi rabbis recognizing that Haredi families also want to be linked up to the new media, and there are all sorts of controls, technological controls over access, but it's a continuing dialogue and conflict regarding the internet websites of the Haredim. So it's quite interesting when we now develop this paper, and I want to show you some of the results for us to look at which media people looked at, and we also need to think of how do I get the, I think I went, can I go to the next table? I think I pushed myself out, Dr. Leluc.
Just press down key.
The which key?
Down key.
Which key?
You can see on your keyboard, there's a down key near the number of keys. There's a down key there.
Okay. Okay, so so now forgive me for that. So now let's go to 3 questions which I want to address in my paper. The first one concerns what was the exposure of the Haredim during the COVID-19 crisis. We did a case study, as I said earlier, of one of the largest Haredi town. We carried out 405 telephone interviews, 2 of my research assistants at RL University, to get a picture of the exposure to information, whether it's from the mass media, the Haredi media, as well as of the views of the rabbis, and whether it calmed them or not, and how they negotiated the dilemma between information they received from the medical authorities on the one hand and the rabbis on the other. And I think overall, this, if you want, this Israeli Jewish presentation here, which I'm bringing you, may well be similar to the types of dilemmas in other countries and other religious communities outside of Israel and the Middle East. Now, as I said at the very beginning, the nature of the Haredi media comprises, at the beginning here, we see institutional daily newspapers, then we have internet, then we have Haredi radio stations, there are 2 of them, and then also the Haredi News weekly magazines. Now, after that, it's interesting that we have secular news websites and secular daily newspapers because, and this is an important point to make, the Haredi media apparently did not provide enough information, adequate information, at least in the eyes of the respondents, and some 20% of them went into, shall we say, the forbidden media, as their rabbis would see it, and they went into the secular news websites, into the secular daily newspapers. So while in general, in normal times, most Haredim do follow the rules and satisfy themselves with the first 4 categories, namely the Haredi daily newspapers, the Haredi news websites, and the Haredi radio stations, the Haredi news weeklies, they felt this was inadequate. But yes, on the other hand, we see something very interesting here. As I said a few minutes ago, there's this internal tension within the Haredi media between the original daily newspapers, daily Haredi newspapers, Hamodia, Yeted Ne'eman, Hamavaser, and Peles, these are the Hebrew names of them, which are even more censored, and they have censors which check the copy each night, as opposed to the, shall we say, the slightly freer, slightly more independent, slightly more critical Haredi media, which has developed, namely the Haredi news weeklies and Haredi internet news websites. So I think it's very interesting that 32% of Haredim in our survey of 405 Haredim in the town of Bnei Barak did say that that the most important source for them was the institutional newspapers. And so it's also interesting on the one hand, on the other hand, the Haredi news weeklies, which were in 4th place, which provide background, which expose, shall we say, corruption inside the religious, the Haredi world, are more freer, are not controlled in terms of content regarding information within the Haredi rabbinical leadership. Only 13% said that this was their major source of information. It could be since these are weeklies as opposed to the news websites, which are continuous 24-hour, 6-day operations. Of course, on the Sabbath, the Haredi media is completely closed. And the Haredi radio stations also, they were seen as providing more immediate information. But I think the overall conclusion from this table 1 has to be that the poorly financed Haredi media need to do some assessment. Whereas they have political reporters, they also have, by the way, military reporters, given that the conflict and defense often comes up in the Israeli news agenda, unfortunately.
Dr. Cohen,
question of medical.
Dr. Cohen, you have about 9 more minutes.
Very good. They don't have medical reporters, and that's going to be one of our conclusions. Allow me go on to the next. There we are. Well, now let me go on to table 2, views concerning religious versus public health issues. We asked our population of 405 respondents, what happens when you see a contradiction between medical guidelines from the Israeli Ministry of Health or the rabbinical guidelines? Now, I think at this stage I need to explain a further point. Social distancing is contrary to the way of life of Haredim. Haredim, like other religious Jews, indeed, like in other religions, recognizes the idea of communal worship. If churches are closed, if mosques are closed, ashrams, and so also synagogues were closed under the government authority instructions in March 2020 and April right through till recently, following the inoculation, and most Israelis have had 3 inoculations already by today. But for the whole of last year, synagogues were basically closed, and communal worship is an important feature not only of Haredi life, but I would say of Jewish life. There's even, since I'm speaking to a religious audience, I can explain that there is an idea of the divine presence of God is more closer and more responsive to prayer, where prayer is conducted in a communal way, 10 men or 10 persons. And so therefore, when the government says no social distance, no socially meeting in the synagogues, and they closed the synagogues, and prayers were held outside and are still held outside in some parts, this created a major dilemma, I should say a crisis of belief, particularly where the rabbis said, no, you need to show your faith. You need to come together for the daily prayer services. By the way, September is the month where the high holidays, the Rosh Hashanah, the New Year, as well as the Day of Atonement, the Yom Kippur services attract the biggest numbers, and the synagogues were closed, not only, of course, inside Israel, but in other countries, including the United States. So the other feature of the problem of social distancing, I should add, is the studying the Holy Scriptures, notably the Talmud. By the way, the Talmudical colleges within the Haredi world are less focused on studying, by the way, the Bible, the prophets, and the 5 books of Moses, are more focused on studying Jewish religious law, halakha, Jewish religious law, and they study this in pairs, in groups together. They have religious classes. So again, if the government authority issue instructions that they must close the yeshivot, the Talmudical colleges, then again this creates a dilemma, particularly when you haven't got the cooperation and the of the rabbis who say uppermost you must show your belief and so on in a God. I should add, just more recently, even before the creation of Pfizer and Moderna, rabbis were brought into line, shall we say, and it was explained to them, and given that Bnei Barak, for example, had a higher death casualty than other parts, I think the message finally sunk home. But anyway, let's go through some of these guidelines we see here. If contradictory, namely that if you see a contradiction between between the medical authorities' instructions and the rabbi's instructions, so you 3.5 of males have said you follow the medicals, whereas 3.66 said you follow the rabbinical ones. Was there a contradiction between rabbinical and medical rules? 3.4 said there was. By the way, a very large 74% said that there was a contradiction. They found personally a contradiction between the instructions they got from the 2 sets of authorities, namely the medical authorities and the rabbinical world. Then we go down, Jewish religious law in line with medical advice. Some people did say so. And then we go down, rabbinical leadership delayed medical recommendations. Here you have the Haredim themselves critical of the rabbis for failing to be more, shall we say, be more moderate and recognize this reality, this new reality in world history of COVID. Then you have the religious studies and observance protects from bodily harm. You see a very high number here, 4.3, seeing that belief, tefillah, prayer, and so on, mitzvot, the commandments and so on, are the way to ensure protection. And then we also have preventive medicine may interfere with religious leadership. Let me go to the last table, which I would like to share with you. The overall interesting question is, did the level information have an calm you or not? And most of the information, of course, came via the media, which goes back to our first table. And we see here something really alarming and of great concern, which must concern to I would say the PR are the public relations efforts of the Israeli medical authorities, the Ministry of Health, the government, and so on, we see here that people did panic, and we see here that almost just under 80% of people were either confused or were slightly anxious or were very concerned about where things were going. In other words, public information needs to address how they function in a time of national, shall we say, international crisis, and only 10% said it had no impact on them. And only if we take the idea of the media is providing information. I mean, the media is in the modern world is not supposed to be a psychologist, but it does. In practice, it does have a calming effect. It creates a framework. It creates a sense of understanding. It creates a sense of rational logic to what is happening. And here we see that the media fail to fulfill probably their mandate, and there surely are lessons to be learnt for the future. And I think it would be useful to compare the Israeli Haredi Jewish model in conclusion to other religious communities in other countries and in other faiths of how they negotiated dilemmas and what was the role of the media during this crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cohen. That was a very detailed presentation of your study there, and we appreciate it very much. Now we will go straight to the questions. Kenneth, our ARC secretary and tech support person today, can you please present some questions for our two presenters, Father Stanislaus and Dr. Cohen, please? Let's start with a question for Father Stanislaus.
For Father Stanislaus, there are two questions. We can accommodate two questions for Father Stan. How can we differentiate between interculturality and syncretism?
And maybe you can just present two questions and then Father Stan can address them both at the same time.
And another one is, how would one use the same language and terminology of interculturality across various faiths and people with no faiths?
Okay.
You're on mute, Father Stan.
Thank you very much for these questions and the comments. Now, we understand when we try to see inculturation and elements into the cultures in the church as well as in our religious circles, syncretism is actually just appropriating the other cultural elements without critique. You just appropriate it now without having much thought to it. Now, interculturality is not that. Interculturality, we try to see which are the good elements in that particular culture, and then we incorporate those good elements. At the same time, we also challenge the elements which are not good, which are not life-giving, which are not gospel-oriented, which are not really integrating for peaceful as well as joyful community. Therefore, when we try to incorporate some symbols, values, traditions, because they look good or outside, or because they are very interesting, then we try to incorporate. No, we are trying to evaluate the basis of the gospel, whether how far that it is really having a gospel value orientation for our smoothful living. So interculturality is in that way, it is enriching. Syncretism does not enrich. It is just to, a way of doing it. But here we enrich one another. We learn from one another. At the same time, we also create a kind of a new culture here. In that particular new culture, we try to live everyone towards achieving peace or the reign of God in our own context. That is one thing. The second one, you asked about what about values of other religions or people who have no religion. Well, as I said, this is in our understanding, interculturality is faith-based, as I said. But interculturality, I also said, people in the multinational companies also promote, and they are successful. Why? Because what is their goal of multinational companies promoting interculturality? It is for profit. They want to increase their investment money and so forth. That is their goal. So all the interculturality element in your organization, we know they invest a lot of money to promote interculturality in the multinational companies so that they may have more profit. That is an orientation. But then we look in our own religious background with the religious communication, religious aspects, we see interculturality is promoting the kingdom of God, promoting the reign of God. So in that element, we try to see the values of other religions. Of course, you are asking the people, those who have no religion or who have no faith. Well, we take the elements of values from those people. There's the elements which are really accepted according to the gospel norms. We take those elements, we interact, enrich one another, and try to really work together for the reign. So that way it helps us to move forward, challenging one another, and at the same time trying to live peacefully and joyfully.
Thank you very much. By the number of questions on this topic, we see that Father Stan's presentation has created a lot of curiosity and interest. But now we go to some questions for Dr. Cohen. Kenneth, can you please give Dr. Cohen some?
Okay, from Father Norman Peña. This is for Dr. Cohen. The same occurs in the Philippines, Dr. Cohen, as regards social distancing as contrary to religious expression of faith. How was this seeming counterculturality resolved?
It was resolved by, in the case of the synagogues, which were closed, having prayer services outside in the open air. It was also resolved even outside because the government limited even the large number of groups outside. Beyond the Haredi religious community, other religious communities, particularly conservatives and reform, notably in the United States, developed Zoom as a means to bring having prayer services. So Friday nights and Saturday morning prayer services have been, and also the high holy days, the New Year and Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur services were held at a Zoom. Because one of the roles of the rabbis, like in other faiths, it's very important that your followers, one's followers, should not be in a state of depression. Depression is also a danger, and so there's a price for social distancing, and so Zoom religious services were developed. The why, therefore, didn't the Haredim develop Zoom religious services? For two reasons. Firstly, the usage of electricity on the Sabbath is problematic in Jewish Orthodox religious law, including, by the way, the conservative movement, but they compromised and they said that we need to be realistic. And for the first time, they allowed electricity. The Ten Commandments says, do not work on the Sabbath. What does work mean? Work has been interpreted and by the rabbis over the hundreds of years to include making a fire and the use of electricity because it involves an electric circuit. And so therefore, Zoom is not a practical solution, was not a practical solution for the prayer services. In other areas, not just the prayer services, I would just briefly add, the learning groups and the Talmudical colleges, the yeshivot, they also met, they did meet through Zoom, through telephones, but they finally moved back at the end of last year. And since the creation again of Pfizer and to some extent Moderna, schools have returned and a sense of the old reality has created. But I just add other religious aspects of religious life, including funerals, were held with great, with very few present, and so on.
Okay, another one, from Fumihiko Matsumoto. Thank you, Dr. Cohen, for your research and the result. I would like to ask you about both good unity and the problem of divisions due to the different denomination of the same religion, namely Judaism in your case.
Sorry, could you say the question again? We had some noise outside, sorry.
Okay. I would like to ask you about both good unity and the problem of divisions due to the different denomination of the same religion, namely Judaism in your case. That's from Dr. Fumihiko Matsumoto.
Okay. Yes, it's a good question, although it didn't have too much of an impact on the COVID. But overall, there are serious theological divisions, like in other faiths. You have divisions, and so in within the Judaism, there are serious divisions. The ultra-Orthodox have their qualifications about the state of Israel because Jewish religious law is not prominent, and the laws are based on being a secular Western country. The modern Orthodox are more identifying and more involved in the state, and of course then you have the seculars. So there are divisions, and like in healthy divisions and unhealthy ones, and I don't think there's a in the short term there's any less likelihood that these will be resolved, because faith is very important, and if you believe, you will go to the upteenth and the point of standing and insisting, and I would therefore nevertheless say that we go on the specific question of new media, that some Haredim are becoming more modern, and within the Haredi world you have what's called the modern Haredim, who do want to go out to work and who want to also be exposed in a controlled way to what's happening in the world in the 21st century.
Thank you very much for that. Unfortunately, we have more questions, but not so much time. So we would like to go on to our next presenter.
There's one, just to give us one, there's an intervention from Dr. Chandra. If you could add him.
There is what?
There's one question. Dr. Chandra just sent me a message. He would like to make an intervention.
Okay.
Dr. Chandra, you're on mute. You're on mute, Dr. Chandra.
I have a very quick question for Father Lazar. He said that, interculturality is accepting the good elements from the different. Now, who decides what's good? And how does one decide that? And is that not precisely how racism functions? Somebody decides that these are good elements, and therefore this is how we will be only interacting with those people and nobody else.
Well, the good elements are decided, as I said, based on the gospel values, first of all. And then these elements are decided as it's an interaction. Therefore, it is by all the communities. Therefore, here comes the question of challenge. It is not by one community decides which is good for the other, but it is a mutual dialogue we decide. So therefore, the mutual dialogue between one community to another community, one culture to another community, in that particular dialogue, we base what is good, this based on the gospel values, and then we decide or we change, and the community moves forward. That is a challenge, but at the same time, there is an enrichment, especially when we have respect, when we have trust, and then trust of the other person, then this can happen. Of course, as I said, the first thing is respect for the other person, other community, other cultures. So then we can decide together.
There's just one quick, one more thing. Interculturality can only function when there are a combination of many monocultures. How does interculturality work when you have many plural cultures? Because there are cultures within cultures within cultures. Then what is interculturality?
Well, one has to understand what is culture here. Okay, so culture, sometimes when you say Indian culture, the sociologist will say from India, there is no Indian culture. There are Indian cultures. So depending upon how you define the culture, and you define the cultures and subcultures and other cultural groups elements. So it is always interculturality is between one culture to another culture, one subculture to another subculture, and so forth.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. This conversation can go very, very much further, and I'm sure I wish we had more time for this kind of exchange. Unfortunately, because of the format of the online, we have limited time. So I would like for us now to go to our next presenter. Dr. Yusuf is a professor and deputy dean of the Students Development and Community Engagement, and also the coordinator of the Islam and Buddhism program at the International Institute of Islamic Civilization and Malay World in Malaysia. Dr. Yusuf is also a senior fellow at the Prince Alwaleed bin Talal Center for Muslim Christian Understanding in Georgetown University in the United States. Formerly, he was the director at the Center for Buddhist Muslim Understanding in the College of Religious Studies at Mahidol University in Thailand. He specializes in religion with a focus on Islam in Thailand and Southeast Asia and Muslim-Buddhist dialogue. So we look forward to hearing from Dr. Yusuf today, and the title of his presentation is Religious Communication During and Post-Coronavirus Pandemic Eras, a Muslim Perspective. We welcome Dr. Yusuf.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much, Father Anthony and Brother Ken, for this opportunity, for giving me this opportunity to come and give a presentation about a Muslim view of what has happened with the coronavirus pandemic, and what is the Muslim understanding of the coronavirus and their responses. I dedicate my presentation today to Father Eilers, with whom I had a long communication and friendship, and we miss him here this evening. So having said that, what I would say in the beginning, that Islam, like every other religion, talks about health and well-being, including the indigenous religions. So all religions offer a view of health and well-being, or which leads to happiness and to welfare and healthy society and healthy individual. But unfortunately, we in our modern age, or the age of the Anthropocene, we have seen the rise of a desacralized approach to life, desacralized approach to science, and this has affected all of us. The coronavirus has not only affected a particular community in China, but it does not discriminate, and thousands of people, millions of people have died, and thousands are in hospitals, and all are suffering. As the Buddha says, there is a cause for suffering, and we have to find out what is the cause for this suffering. And the cause of this suffering is the human being. In a way, I would say that the human being is responsible for bringing this coronavirus on itself. And this reminds me of what the Quran and Islam's view about this is, or what is the Sharia view. When I use the word Sharia, I want to use it in a way that you don't get frightened of me. Whenever the term Sharia is mentioned, people think about cutting of hands. The Sharia talks about hudud. Hudud means the limits beyond which the human being should not go. Or if the human being goes beyond the certain limits set by God, that leads to imbalance, injustice, and suffering of different types. And we have been seeing that since 1990s, there is the ecological crisis, the environmental crisis, and the COVID-19 and coronavirus is a part of that human indifference and human behavior, which has brought this pandemic on all of us. I remember when I was teaching in Assumption University in 1990, the Kyoto Protocol was agreed upon in regard to climate change. but the big countries refused to accept the protocol, the Kyoto, to approve the Kyoto Protocol. And now, recently, the famous natural historian, Sir David Attenborough, in an article 2 years ago at the Davos conference said that Garden of Eden is no more. We have all lended ourselves into this age of crisis, of global ecological crisis. And just 2 or 3 days ago, in the Glasgow conference, where all the national leaders met, they agreed to address the change in the issue of climate change. But they are mostly making pledges. And again, Sir David Attenborough said that we have to work cooperatively together to address the pandemic as well as the climate change. Now, from the perspective of the Quran, the scripture of Islam, it talks about that God has created the whole planetary system in a state of balance, or what the Arabic word is mizan, and it calls upon the human being not to upset the balance. It says all the scriptures, all the prophets have brought about the message of mizan, or balance, but when the human being rebels against the balance and they upset the balance, this is when humanity brings suffering onto itself. So the balanced approach is very important in personal life as well as social life, communal life, and now also at the international level. We all are affected. Since last 2 years, I have not been to the mosque because I don't trust that the person next to me is a COVID carrier, is a virus carrier. Mosques have been closed. The Muslims have not been able to go to Hajj, the pilgrimage, and I will come to that more later. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him, said that there is no disease that God has created except that He has created also its treatment. But we do see that even within the religious tradition, whether it is as mentioned by Dr. Cohen, and I would also say among the Muslims, there are people who support, majority who support the taking of vaccine, but there are also anti-vaxxers who say that we leave it to God and God will set, whether that comes to us or not, it is God's will. This is a sense of irresponsibility from the perspective of Islamic view of human being as being a vicegerent of God on earth. And Prophet Muhammad also, during Prophet Muhammad's time and also during the early age of Islam, there were five plagues. And there's a saying reported from Prophet Muhammad. He says, if you hear an outbreak of a plague in a land, do not enter it. But if the plague breaks out in a place while you are in it, do not leave that place. This is basically the idea of quarantine. The famous Muslim philosopher, scientist, mathematician, geographer, and a medical doctor, Avicenna or Ibn Sina of the Middle Ages, who wrote the book The Canon of Medicine, a very important book. He had discovered through his study of disease that there are the spread of microorganisms from causes human to human contamination. And he came up with a method of isolating human beings for 40 days, and which in Arabic is called Arabiyin, which the idea of quarantine has been drawn from his work in his book Canon of Medicine. I will not go into detail about him, and I'll come directly to the issue which we are facing today. So there are religious and metaphysical dimensions to the coronavirus and the pandemic, and it has affected religious communication within intra and inter-religious societies. We all are affected by it, and this can only be addressed through religious communication, which leads to religious solidarity in addressing the interests of all the groups and all the societies across the world. And this requires us of studying the source of medicine and how to address this challenge of the coronavirus and the pandemic, which I see as is not coming to an end any soon. we have seen, and it is very interesting, I teach comparative religion, and it have seen, and I was just telling my students the other day, that religious festivals have now become the super spreaders. You see, now we are celebrating every religious festival or every religious event in which the community engages without observing, in spite of being communicated by the national leaders and the medical leader and the health workers and the doctors, that you have to practice the SOPs or the movement control measures. Yet religious festivals and events have become the sources. I just was telling my students, for example, when we have the Eid, the Muslim festival, when we have the Deepavali, when we have the Christmas, and when we have the Chinese New Year. So it is going to be round circle of the spread of the increase of the numbers. For example, in Malaysia, recently, after the end of Ramadan, the numbers of daily infections were going up to 20,000, and the Malaysian government had to put in strict lockdowns, and also encourage, and the religious leaders in Malaysia had to ask the people to go and get vaccine. And Malaysia initiated a program of rapid vaccination. So today the numbers are down to 3,000 new infections per day. Because of the strict restrictions which were put on movement. But I'm sure as another religious festivals come in, religious events takes place, it doesn't matter which religion it comes to, the numbers will go up. I'm saying this in a way that I'm saying that unless and until the human being does not understand their position on this earth of which we are, and our responsibility, not over to ourselves and being selfish, but to the whole humanity, the suffering will not end. Muslim scholars, Muslim jurists, and Muslim scholars of Islamic jurisprudence have made fatwas or opinions encouraging Muslims to promoting vaccination for social good, for common good of everybody. For example, because now if you, as it happens that attending of Friday prayers is limited to numbers. This is something what Dr. Cohen was talking about, and similarly to him, to what he was talking about. And everybody has to bring their own prayer mat. And now we have to show that we are fully vaccinated. We should carry our digital certificates when we enter the mosque, and then the mosque doors are closed immediately, and the prayer is conducted very fast so that there is not it does not extend, and immediately the mosque is closed after the service is over. Similarly, so there's a lot of screening going on, not only in the public place but also in the religious place. In the Mecca, the Hajj or the pilgrimage to Mecca has been limited or restricted by the Saudi Arabian government. Normally 2 million people come to attend the Hajj every year, but since last 2 years, it has limited only to Saudi Arabian citizens, because Saudi Arabia does not want to make the Hajj as a religious ritual which will lead to suffering of humanity. So COVID or pandemic, the pandemic does not discriminate between religious communities. It has also affected the funerals. The people who have persons who have died of COVID has affected the funerals. They are limited. The attendance of I've seen some of my friends and my relatives pass away, and they say that this is a COVID funeral, so please don't come and don't join. So this is what has and the prayer, and people are now said to pray from home or that rather than going to the mosques. So it has affected, as I said, the funerals and the handling of the dead bodies, and the ritual for the funeral has also been affected. So religious communication plays an important role. Now, as we see, I'm talking from giving the examples from the Muslims, but also that there are examples from other religions where it has affected every community. But at the same time, some of the governments are not sensitive to the religiosity or the religious sensitivities of other religions. For example, in Sri Lankan government, it had mandatory that all the people who died from COVID should be cremated, and it affected the Muslims and the Christians of Sri Lanka because they don't practice cremation, but they practice burying of the dead. So finally, the Sri Lankan government had to change its ruling. So in this sense, interfaith understanding is very important. Let me end here by saying that the life we lived before the coronavirus, before the pandemic, was a life full of excessive materialism, consumption, and which was going on. You would see the airports were filled. The people were traveling from all countries. Everyone was busy. The Air Asia was busy. Everyone was flying, and there was no limit. We had forgotten our own role and our own place on this earth. So we landed up in this situation because of our own misunderstanding of what the role of human being is. And then there is also, as Dr. Cohen has mentioned and others, that about the discrimination which has taken place in regarding to the sharing of the vaccine. The poor countries, especially the African countries, are suffering a lot, and yet the availability of vaccination is very, very limited, to African countries because they cannot afford. So this kind of, while there are countries which are hoarding vaccines or throwing away vaccines which are expiring very fast, and this calls for again the role of communication between the governments, between the religious bodies, between the religious communities, and also the rich and the poor countries, the North and South divide. So my last few comments here is that from the perspective of Islam, we have seen that in the case of Muslim countries, there has been a cooperation taking place between the scientific community and the religious community, though there are some who reject to be vaccinated. But what is needed is a collaboration and collective effort in addressing the question of addressing the pandemic era, not only now but also after the end, because the whole of humanity is suffering. It really brings me to tears to see how the whole of humanity is suffering, and we have to change our ways of our life. And it is there where the Quranic teaching of mizan or balance is important. We need to have a balanced approach to life, a balanced approach to environment, a balanced approach to society and interhuman relationship, so that I hope that we can have a new kind of humanism, a humanism where religion, science, secular or believers or non-believers understand through this great suffering which all of us are going through and has not ended. And even now, I am teaching most of my courses online. My students in America, I teach at 5 p.m. here in Malaysia, but my student in America has to get up at 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. in the morning just to attend to my lectures. And this is kind of suffering which is global. So it is time that we realize that we redress ourselves and redress the situation and redress our understanding of the role of human being in this planetary system. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yusuf, for this very affirming talk, not only from the Muslim perspective, but I think for us who come from other religious traditions, we can also relate to the thoughts that you presented in so many ways, because the spiritual foundation that you presented can be reached across cultures and across traditions, religious traditions as well. Before we address the questions that have been presented to you, I would like for us to first go to our next presenter, and then afterward we will present the two sets of questions together. So our next presenter is Dr. Chandrabhanu Pattanayak. He is the director of the Institute of Knowledge Societies in India. IKS holds the exploration of the interface between modern technologies and traditional knowledge systems at its core. He is also the producer and director of the Indira Gandhi National Open University and has made several video and audio programs which have been telecast and broadcast on national and international channels on numerous occasions and have been used as classroom teaching aids in several universities and institutions throughout the world. He has produced and directed about 40 videos and about 50 radio documentaries, and he has attended and presented scholarly papers in more than 150 national and international conferences. So today he will be speaking to us on the topic of homogenization of religious practices during COVID times, a new digital caste system. We welcome Chandra. You can unmute yourself first. You're still on mute. You're still on mute. So Chandra, you need to get yourself unmuted so that we can hear you. Okay, there you are.
Okay. No, it was just that it was telling me that the host should unmute you. So, hello, can you hear me now?
Yeah, you have to unmute yourself. We can mute you.
No, it tells me here, I tried unmuting, it says the host is not allowing you to unmute.
Okay, first, now we can hear you. We're okay.
All right. Okay. So many of you may remember that a few years ago I made a presentation about the future of religion in India, and in that paper I had made certain predictions as far as digital future is concerned. So it seems like some of my predictions may have come true. In the context of the pandemic, that whole world has gone through, both inequality and unemployment generated immense dissatisfaction and alienation in and among the people. In such situations, essentially two responses may be possible, and they may exist simultaneously. One, which is that human beings search for answers to existential questions, will begin to gain momentum, and therefore accessing the spiritual self will attract more people. This has been the reason for the popularity of new religious movements worldwide. Now, if you replace new religious movements with digital platforms, what is happening during and after the pandemic is quite interesting to see. These movements will use some kind of, or do use some kind of technique of accessing that they have borrowed from other religious traditions, especially institutionalized religious traditions. These break the boundaries of organized religions and prioritize accessing the self instead of following traditional religions and rituals. The number of movements might grow in times to come, and the popularity of existing movements would become multi-religious and multinational. However, in India, this is what I had said earlier. However, in India, during and after the COVID-19 pandemic, something strange has happened. Instead of organized religions becoming less prioritized, they have become more prioritized. I'll come back to this in a minute. It would be interesting to note, and this is why I'm saying this, and I may not even have to come back to this. This is an example. It would be interesting to note that the Indian state, the Indian state-run television, which is many, both state-run as well as private televisions, which are now being controlled by the state in sort of roundabout ways, and several YouTube channels and a lot of other channels reran the Indian epic television programs which were made in the 90s, namely the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. These classical Indian epics. As soon as COVID-19 began to spread throughout India, the first thing that the government of India did was started rerunning these two epics. There are about 400 episodes each, something like that. So it would go through 2 years. Now, it is interesting to note that these programs waned in interest and stopped airing almost as soon as the vaccines became available. Okay. About a dozen other religious programs were broadcast over all traditional as well as non-traditional media channels. These were mostly of a particular Hindu persuasion and was promoted by the government of the day. This also coincided with the huge migration of migrant labor back to their homes. So when the COVID happened, there were roughly about 50 million or so, 50 to 100 million people who migrated, who are migrant labor, who have gone from different parts of the country to other parts of the country, who had to return home. And many of these people, almost 50% of these people, had no way of returning back. Many of them had actually walked hundreds of miles. Some walked 1,000 miles to get back to their homes with their families and with whatever they could carry on their backs. No food available. There were horrific stories about people following the railway track and having died, run over by trains. Now, all of these things were happening, and millions of labor who had no food. The government had no way of controlling the movement. And this was considered as one of the major reasons for the spread of corona throughout the country in India. I just want to mention that whatever I'm saying is largely in relation to India. Second, religion as a source of identity, this is what I had said earlier, may gain further ground as the secular identity of a state citizen has failed to provide them with enough security. Mostly, the history of intercommunity relationships has been the history of conflicts and war. The collective consciousness of communities is loaded with the memories of such relationships. The concept of citizenship gave some of moving beyond the memory of the past conflictual relations. However, the present crisis invoked those memories and religion as ideology consolidating communities would gain ground. This gave rise to a politically based or to a politics-based on religious identities. The rise of religion as an identity challenged the traditional form of organized religion in a very interesting way. The political form of religion subsumed the conventional religious authorities, which means political Islam or political Hinduism became more potent than the imams or the Shankaracharyas. The form of response focused more on the form of religion than its content. Therefore, rituals, norms, places of worship, etc., would become sites of conflict. And so, the interesting thing was how easy it became to make that movement from the performative spaces of the conventional religious or the conventional religious spaces to a digital space. The experiential dimension of religion is sustained by rites, rituals, pilgrimages, and ceremonies. The performance and participation of the specialist and the non-specialist in these heightened moments of consciousness constitutes the experience of religion for its practitioners. The measures put in place by governments, and this has been mentioned by earlier speakers, across the world to arrest the spread of COVID-19 resulted in alteration and disruption of these performative aspects of religion, leaving the believers to improvise, interpret, and explore new avenues and alternatives. The speed at which a distinction was marked between the offline and the online modes of some of the rituals and ceremonies bears testimony to the continuing value of religion and the tenacity of believers to adapt the rigid, formulaic, and ritually binding performances of normal times to the fast-changing reality of the pandemic-infected world. So the pujas, the artis, the satsangs, the darshans have all metamorphosed in lightning speed to the online mode. Something unthinkable in pre-pandemic times. For believers, religion constitutes an explanatory system par excellence. It assists the believers to make sense of what is happening around them and the world at large by positing a worldview or cosmology, said Geertz. Believers have taken recourse to religion in general and religious leaders in particular for cogent explanations on the world in the times of COVID-19. The range of religiously couched explanations are galore and originate from various standpoints. One of the common explanations that religions offer for the pandemic is that it is a visible sign of human frailty and culpability. However, this is precisely what created the fissure in the Indian polity at that time. Some influential religious leaders have found a link between the coronavirus and the imageries of apocalypse, end of times, and the time of retribution mentioned in their scriptures. For example, it was said that this is going to be the end of the Kali Yuga, which is the yuga where everything is in turmoil, and the end of Kali Yuga brings about a lot of these kinds of pandemics where people die like flies and so on and so forth, and ultimately this is going to result in some sort of great revival, and you'll again have the era of truth. Now, similar themes with vivid portrayals of the end times and the day of judgment are plenty in cinematic representations mediated through Hollywood and Bollywood cinema. Consequently, leaders of Semitic religions have hitched on to the imageries of the end of times to explain COVID-19 and its after effects. One of the signs mentioned in the scriptures dealing with the end of time is a pestilence of a massive scale. Some religious leaders have turned themselves into doomsday prophets and invoke this imagery to make sense of the pandemic as a sign of the end of time, exhorting their followers to take note of the signs and portents and getting themselves ready for the end. This also brought about a lot of conspiracy theories, mediatized, deliberate propaganda, so on and so forth. The great example of television news channels in India portrayed the Tablighi Jamaat congregation in New Delhi in March 2020 as part of the conspiracy to spread coronavirus in India. Some have added, there have been many conspiracy theories and all over the world. It's not only in India. Everybody knows about Mr. Trump's conspiracy theories regarding the vaccines. So what happened was that, suddenly the religious, what I call the religious performative space, turned into a digital space which was controlled by a very few, and it was also accessible to a very few. Unlike what everybody thinks, that the digital format is democratic and whatever, it is not. It's hugely controlled. And let me just give you some statistics. Mission Antodaya, a nationwide survey of villages conducted by the Ministry of Rural Development of the Government of India, showed that 16% of India's household received 1 to 8 hours of electricity daily. 33% received 9 to 12 hours, and 47% received more than 12 hours a day. While 24% Indians own a smartphone, only 11% of the households possess any type of computer, which would include desktop computers, laptops, notebooks, palm tops, tablets, whatever. Now, even the penetration of digital technologies in India has been haphazard and exclusionary. According to the 2017-18 National Sample Survey, only 24% of Indian households have internet facility, while 66% of India's population lives in the villages. Only a little over 15% of rural households have access to internet services. For urban households, the proportion is 42%. In fact, only 8% of all households with members aged between 5 and 24 have both a computer and an internet connection. It is also useful to note that as per the National Sample Survey definition, a household with a device or internet facility does not necessarily imply that the connection and devices are owned by the household. The digital divide is evident across class, gender, region, or place of residence. Among the poorest 20% households, only 2.7% have access to a computer and 8.9% to internet facilities. Okay. In case of the 20% households, the proportions are 27 and so on and so forth. Okay. So as you see, internet and the digital world is restricted to largely urban, middle class people who not only access internet and access the online world, but also control it. Okay, so therefore, the movement of the religious performative space, which was much more open, in a sense secular, becomes enclosed in a very, very urban middle class controlled system. Now this
you have about 3 to 5 minutes.
Yeah. So in this system, what happens is that we already have a stratified society in terms of caste and class. We created a second level of stratification or a second level of caste system, which actually was in alignment with the original caste system. So the upper castes are now the upper classes. So religion became only restricted to that group and therefore became easily controllable and became homogenized in a mainstream sense of the term. The religious practice, which had always been very pluralistic in India, found a perfect canvas to homogenize. This also helped politicize religion and create a world of extreme positions. This is something new in the Indian socio-religious tradition of the past. This has created a situation where people find religion a source of solidarity and fraternity, manipulated and maintained by the state, which are much needed virtues for their struggle against a so-called capitalism and a state which was based on the principles of secularism and democracy. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that presentation. Let's now go quickly to the questions so that we can get the last presentation from Father Norman in as well. Kenneth, can you please give us some questions for our two presenters, please?
Okay, we have one question from Mr. Muhammad Masri. How do we restore a sense of social trust in society? This is addressed to Professor Yusuf. How do we restore a sense of social trust in society, for instance, our fear to go to pray in house of worship, and those who refuse or hesitant to be vaccinated as a result caused by COVID-19 pandemic, by appealing to the sense of sacred in Islam?
Okay, let me answer this question. I think that the answer to this question lies in our modern age understanding of the idea or the concept of freedom. Modern age idea of the concept of freedom is based on what John Stuart Mill called the greatest happiness principle. And this idea of happiness, greatest happiness principle, is against the idea, what religions teach about yin-yang balance, or the balance of balanced human life between within the planetary system, unless and until we don't re-understand the idea of freedom in a balanced sense of understanding. There will be global suffering as we are going through now. For example, right now, even there are, in spite of the pandemic, in spite of the millions of deaths, I think I'm numbering about 7 million or so. People in France and Europe say they don't want to be vaccinated, and they don't realize that this is a sense of irresponsibility, and they are the anti-vaxxers are causing no human being is isolated in this world. They are all interrelated, in one way or the other. So I'm not only I should not be selfish, but I'm also responsible for the happiness and the safety and security and healthiness of my neighbor, or based on the Christian principle or Jesus principle of love thy neighbor. It reminds me of Professor Wilfred Cantwell Smith, the famous scholar of Islam, from Canada. One day somebody asked him, "Are you a Christian?" And he said, "Go and ask my neighbor." And I think that is the answer. which tells us that we all are responsible for each other. And that means we have to re-understand the idea of freedom. It is pre-pandemic era and post-pandemic era. But human being is rebellious. And this is, as the Bible teaches, as the Quran teaches, as the Torah teaches, the example of Pharaoh. The Pharaoh was rebellious to God. And unless and until we don't give up this rebelliousness, we will continue to suffer. And what the previous speaker, Chandra, also mentioned about how certain elite castes have become elite rich people. On the other hand, also the digitalization of our daily life. It has the economic benefit. Who are benefiting from this digitalization of life, which we are engaging in today? It is the media companies, the network companies, the Microsoft, the Google, the WhatsApp, the Zoom. They are really minting money out of this pandemic, while the poor are still suffering and suffering more than before the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you.
One more.
Let's go to the question for Chandra first.
For Chandra. I'm looking at the.
For Chandra, we mostly have comments.
Yeah, mostly comments for Dr. Chandra.
Okay, but let me ask Chandra a question. I think what you're focusing on in your observation is about the digital divide that's really causing this sort of creation of different classes in India. But at the same time, India is such a great market for the digital industry. So how is this focus on India from the technology giants? Really, is this a way to help develop India forward to decrease this digital divide, or is this furthering the gap within the society of India itself?
Yeah, well, when I talked about the digital divide, it was only to point out that how this digital divide has created a situation where a largely pluralistic system has become homogenized because it got encapsulated in this digital format. Okay, so the people who are let us say worshipping multiple religions and who were engaged in many different kinds of religious practices, their organizations closed down, their temples closed down, and everything. So it became very easy for the government to kind of control this thing. So it became a kind of a caste system. So this is one thing. But to answer your question, the digital divide argument has been going on for quite a while in India. However, in spite of all the digital giants of the world, we still have only, as I mentioned, about 11% of the total population that actually have access to internet. Okay, then we only have about 40% of the total country which has access to even basic electricity for more than 12 hours. Okay, so digital Googles and the whoever you might think, ultimately what has happened in, for example, this whole thing when COVID happened, we all went into this business of online education. As a result of this divide, 85% of India did not have education for 1.5 years. Simply did not have any education. as a result of this. And yet, we took this on because the whole world is talking about it. The only alternative to face-to-face education is let us go into this kind of education. But who is getting this education? So it's a kind of argument that has been going on forever and ever, and it will continue to happen, go on until we have, across the board uniform access to internet and electricity and hardware, software, all of these things, which is nowhere near the truth.
But we see that Mark Zuckerberg looks to India and sees the potential of 1 billion Facebook users. And,
because of the numbers.
Yes.
Because of the numbers. Okay, so even 20% of India's population is larger than many the total populations of half a dozen Asian countries put together.
Right.
So just because in terms of numbers, yes, we are huge. I mean, we have a billion handsets, mobile handsets, and yet only 20% have those billion handsets. And this is government's report. This is not my report.
Thank you very much. Let's go back to Dr. Yusuf. Let's give him one more question before we go to Father Norman. Ken? Ken, you need to unmute yourself.
Okay, one question for Dr. Yusuf. How do we regain the state of balance in the midst of indifference of people, despite the common religious tenet to care for one another?
I will answer this question with my personal experience. I believe in equality of religions in spite of uniqueness and differences between religions. Unless and until we don't accept of equality of religions, it is very difficult to build trust with each other. In my experience, I have taught at a Protestant university, at a Catholic university, at a Buddhist university, and a Muslim university, and this has taught me my own personal experience that in spite of religious differences, there is uniqueness between religions and we can learn from each other. I see religions as parallel lines which meet at a meeting point, and then they have a discourse together like we are having now. And from this discourse, from this meeting point, we go to the next station, a higher station, which will enrich our own personality, our understanding of our own religions, as well as that of others. And it will lead to social harmony. Social harmony is a very important principle. Not only equality, but social harmony is a very important principle, at least in Asia and in Asian religions and in Asian societies. We talk more. Social harmony is the basis of social unity. And then my last comment here would be that talking from Islamic theology, and I think people from other different religions will also say that it is the human being who is responsible. The Quran says the evil does not come from God. In Quranic theodicy, evil does not come from God, but it comes from the human being himself when they upset the balance, as I had mentioned before. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have one more question for Chandra, but I'm going to save it for after Father Norman's presentation. So we'll go to Father Norman's presentation first, and then after that, this is the last presentation for this evening, and then after that, we'll go to some more discussion for his presentation, as well as questions for our previous presenters. Now, Father Norman Peña is a priest in the Society of St. Paul. He is Dean of Studies of St. Paul Seminary Foundation and lectures on intercultural communication, mission, new evangelization, and communication planning and management, and social media studies at the Divine Word Institute of Mission Studies, Mary Hill School of Theology, and St. Paul University of Manila. Father Norman holds a doctorate in communication from the University Pontificia Salesiana in Italy, and a doctorate in education from the St. Paul University of Manila. So we welcome him this evening, our last speaker for the evening.
So good evening, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can.
Yes, Father.
Tonight at 10:20 here in the Philippines. So I will be boring you with 252 slides. No, just joking. Just joking. I'll be brief. I'll just skip some. But I like, first of all, let me thank the organizers and also the speakers. I actually have learned a lot as regards to that too, and to some of the things that they have said. I like, for example, Dr. Yusuf mention of uniqueness, equality in terms of the religions. And if I could add something to that, according to John Paul II, he actually adds another one in relation to the body, and that is, I think the religions should work on, have worked on uniqueness, have worked now on equality. The next stage, I believe, that is apparent according to John, if we will use John Paul II's idea, is actually complementarity. To learn from one's, to be complementary. To learn to be complementary. What I do is actually helpful to you too. In that sense, I would actually present my study on Christ, cross, and COVID-19, the words that never die in the new normal religious communication. I begin with the structure, and this will be quick. Structure and definition of terms: religious communication as transmission of belief and practice. COVID-19 is pandemic, virus, reality. The new normal for me is not actually an adjective. It's supposed to be a noun. What do I mean? It's supposed to be an attitude rather than an adjective that describes it. It's an attitude that we have of doing things. Different perspective. The 7 last words of Jesus is a communication. It's actually words of a dying person, last will and testament, 7-fold practice of hope, which later on I would suggest as terms for religious education, religious communication in the future, which means training forward, moving forward. It's a guide to action. The last thing actually to die, I was told by one of our Italian priests before. I spent around 11 years in Italy as well, and then 16 years in Australia. Then I have encountered many ideas in terms of culture. One of them actually is the idea of hope. One of our old priests in Italy was saying it is actually the last thing to die, hope. And that the words for me, in the last words, actually are words that never die. It's an invitation to significance as well as undying hope. These are sort of the problems of the thesis, of the challenges, which are I term as challenges. How do these different current realities and prerequisites of the new normal relate to religious communication, which was highlighted already by Father Anthony in his opening speech. And then, is there not a seeming counterculturality between communication, communication of religious faith, normally practiced by Filipinos through rituals, and the new normal, which seems to hinder actually them, which is actually the report a while ago as well of Dr. Cohen. And then what converging affordances in religious communication is evident between the new normal and the 7 last words of Jesus? And then how would they impact on communication among different religious faiths? So these are the 4 questions that have guided this. The reality of COVID-19, we all know safety protocols, new normal in the Philippines, different lockdowns from ECQ to MCQ to MGCQ, all the Qs anyway, all the Qs. They have all the Qs. And it's still continuing. It's still continuing. Flexible learning, we all know that. People are homebound. And then the idea that no one is actually exempted from COVID-19 or its effect. No one. It affects everyone. It affects everyone. So there is a global challenge, therefore, COVID-19 of death. And here comes, this is research. COVID-19 comes as the new cross in need actually of healing for each of us. It comes as a new challenge, a new tragedy, a new crisis in need of hope and healing. Okay, this is one of the things that I have put inside that thesis. The concept of the new normal is neither something that is new. No, it's not. Nor a sole fruit begotten by COVID-19 pandemic. It's actually started, the new normal in itself. Even in the 1890s, there is already a mention of the new normal. Even in terms of war, September 11, there's already the new normal. And then, like social media communication, the phrase new normal can be considered as a product of evolution rather than a revolution. It's a product of evolution rather than an evolution, similar to social media. And this has been testified by many psychologists like Cohen and others, the Canadian. It's actually a product of evolution rather than a revolution. The 7 last words which I will associate with the sevenfold practice of hope are here. I think you know most of them, Father. And then the gospel readings where they are actually here. And then where we like to go is treatment of this, in each of this, for religious communication in the new normal. Entreaty, which says, Father, forgive them, disclosure. Woman, behold thy son, which speaks of relationships in the religious communication. Eli Eli, lema sabachthani, isolation, abandonment, fulfillment in the iters. It is finished. Of course, there is fulfillment and entrustment. Into your hands I commend my spirit. So there is a variety. And this is what actually I did put in here. Most of this, the religious communication, the one that you will find out, and I will preempt it, speaks mostly about identity, which is what communication is. Transmission of identity, transmission of who I am, and the discovery of who the other person is in relation to me. So most of these are actually based on that. And Pope Francis has mentioned this, the crucifix is our compass and hope in life, actually. That's the hope. And then one of the favorite philosophers here in our seminary, it's actually Nietzsche, who said, he who has a why to live can bear with almost anyhow. And he who has a why in communication, I always believe, can bear with almost anyhow in communication. That's by Friedrich Nietzsche. Okay, the words on the cross become the new normal way of guiding beacons to how religious communication can be effectuated during the pandemic. They herald hope in God, the first and the last word of creation. So there is the balance between the first and the last word. I like the balance of Dr. Yusuf, really, and what he had mentioned about the creation and balance. Thank you, Dr. Yusuf. Okay, and then, okay, this is just the first, oops, I will go on here. Okay, the first word is, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do. Okay, I will just skip this one. And then this one speaks of entreaty that I have highlighted. Luke's communicate, the Gospel of Luke communicates a unitary link in the identity, as has been mentioned, of Jesus who harmonizes himself with God. Entreaty in religious communication emerges from the prayer of mercy. Father, forgive them, for the people and for God. Entreaty is better understood, I always believe, in the dual concept of etymology. This is the Hebrew one, of mercy, which is the rahamim and the hesed. The rahamim is synonymous to that tender compassion and often induces persons peripheral acts or resources that can elevate a felt need. Ayan, that is actually the rahamim. Hesed, nonetheless, refers to a covenant love, steadfast loyalty, commitment, or promise. In reality, when I first saw rahamim and hesed, I thought to myself, maybe our concept of mercy and compassion that we always put together is actually redundant, because rahamim, mercy, is already compassion. Perhaps we focus more really on mercy as compassion rather than as a loyalty. And I think that is entreaty. In our religious communication, we do not only actually give compassion, but actually it speaks of our commitment to our religious belief, whatever it is, of the God we serve, and that is actually entreaty. Okay, the entreaty, it reads as entreaty, Father, forgive them, is identity of the Father. It's actually identity of God who calls. Then they know not, knowledge and wisdom, fruit of who we are. In Tagalog, in Filipino, it's called buma. Knowledge in the Bible, okay, I know, I understand, I comprehend. Cogito ergo sum, according to Descartes, cogito ergo sum. Response to the call as your identity. And then what they do, it's a fruit of being, is actually doing. If you know a bit of the Italian as well, fare insegnare instead of fare insegnanti, that it is always better to concentrate first on what makes a teacher rather than what to teach. The acts done in relation to a response. So the communication is actually done in relation to also to a response. What does entreaty mean in terms of religious education? Religious communication in the new normal challenges persons to go beyond communication which focuses only on transmitting acts. It's not only a transmission, what's actually rooting that communication in one act of commitment and identity as children of God. Example here in the Covenant narrative is actually the Maginhawa Community Pantry. When the founder, Patricia noon, as a slogan, she said, kumuha ayon sa pangangailangan, which means get according to your needs and give according to your capacity. She's actually only 26 years old, and she has inspired as her way of communication, religious communication, by what she did actually. Even in the community pantry as a COVID narrative, in terms of communication, no one actually cannot not give, because it's actually you give according to your capacity. Whatever you can give. And when we interviewed her before, she was asked, what after COVID-19, what do you think of your community pantry or mutual aid? Will it stop? And the way she answered was actually superb too. She said, I think it will never stop because people will always be in need of one thing or the other. And that's where the community pantry always exists. We are there because of a felt need that we have actually to respond to. So that is actually a form of entreaty, answering the need of the other. Okay, the second one is, you will be with me in paradise, mentioned by Jesus, of course, to the thief. That's in Luke. So what is it? What is there? This is actually a disclosure, which speaks of themselves being under the same sentence of condemnation. This refers to the thief, and actually that thief saying to Christ, this is the man, this is Christ, he has done nothing wrong. So it refers to, I always believe, me and the others. Therefore, the disclosure is actually acknowledging me and the others around you. Religious communication, the new normal, should never forget that it will always be a disclosure of identity. It's not only about me, but me being enriched by the you, and you being enriched by the me. So in disclosure of Christ, the criminal who defended him, there is a revelation of presence. He's very good in German, Gegenwart, which is a presence. And then that presence is not only Gegenwart, it's actually Gegenseitig, which is mutual. That presence should actually, that felt presence should be mutual. Our religious communication should not only be Gegenwart, but a Gegenseitig. Ayan, the mutuality. It's actually supposed to be empowering, and we respond to it. Religious communication is a revelation of presence, Gegenwart, truth as the primary communication, which mentioned on the cross, truly I say to you. And then feedback response, mutual, Gegentai. Okay, so that's disclosure. Religious communication sees also imperfection, like in the terms of, this is also nice, in the terms of the thief, who is actually a criminal, therefore imperfect. Religious communication sees imperfection of the instrument of communication as is strengthened by the truth of the message that embodied by Christ. So it doesn't matter if you are not learned, do not have money. It doesn't mean that you cannot communicate religiously, or that you do not have the instruments of communication, the new cell phone like this. It doesn't matter whether you don't have this in terms of religious education. It's the matter there is the truth of the message that you preach. Clothed with human imperfection, persons are invited to a more authentic disclosure, accompanied by a felt need. And this is what I have mentioned before. Here now, in the COVID narrative, I mentioned here the frontliners that each of our countries have. Many frontliners died in the hope of saving lives. Sickness as a physical limitation will be present. Yet the communication of authentic service and commitment of many frontliners inspire and shape hope. Ayan, maganda. This is nice about the hope that it brings. St. Augustine mentioned once that hope has two beautiful daughters. One is fear, and actually, one is fear and one is action. Yeah, courage. One is fear and courage. Fear that something bad has happened, you need actually that, but you also need courage so that it will not remain the same. So that the fear that you fear will not remain the same. There will be something, you need courage there. Okay, the third word is about woman, behold your son, and it speaks about relationships. Invites person to open their minds and hearts to new attitude, yet equally profound and sound ways of relational encounter, not based only on blood or usual convention. This means authentic encounter. Later on, as you would see here, it's not only about being interconnected and as highlighted by Pope Francis, it's not enough to be just interconnected or to connect. What we need is actually authentic. Those connections should lead to authentic encounter. I think this is very much interesting because religious communication, even with the digital things that we do, it's not about connecting people. It's about those connections being authentic, leading to relationships. Religious communication works for the creation not only of connections, but authentic relationships. Okay, repeats and repeats. So one is authentic encounter begets true relationships. It's dual identity, communication, a new normal perspective affirms what is good in ourselves and what is good in others, and that is authentic connection, recognizing this is actually what I meant before, complementarity. It's not just uniqueness, it's not just equality, but complementarity, seeing the good in ourselves and also in the others. Relationship in religious communication invites people to deepen their relationship and go beyond proximity to real concern for the others, be they close relatives or not. Hope is in awareness and concern for what is good for ourselves and also the others. So COVID-19, there is the idea of neighborliness as seen in the Philippine concept of bayanihan and damay. Bayanihan means working or cooperating together, and then damay is actually helping. Here, the Italian words are actually interesting, used by the Pope. Actually, it's called vicino and prossimo, which is vicino is near, proximity, and then prossimo is just neighborliness. And Pope Francis emphasized here not necessarily to be a neighbor, vicino, but prossimo. Filipinos actually communicate this using only one word but accented differently. Malapit, which is distance, or now. For example, distance-wise, because of computer, I am near to you. You can hear me. Pero I could not say that we are yet malapit because we just met, all of you. It's actually a close concern, which means even though you're in other countries, if we are malapit, therefore that is neighborliness. Your concerns, even though you are far, becomes my concern too. And I believe that is the highlight of religious communication, not only to bring people near to each other, but actually to know their concerns, Next is the fourth word, my God, why have you abandoned me? From I think for the first three were good. This is somewhat, in a sense, not that good. Why have you abandoned me? And what does it say? Here I could say, in terms of religious communication, it's actually isolation. The first and the fourth words together, paradox between absolution and abandonment, trust, inquiry, identity, and doubt. When the feeling of security and surety seem no longer sustainable, COVID brings this one too. The feeling of security for anyone is no longer sustainable. We have to follow the protocols. Forsaken means being abandoned. Isolation is a painful encounter with God, a cry of pain when He is mostly sought. COVID-19 experiences of death and isolation manifest and communicate such pain. Of course, in isolation, there is always communication breakdown. Religious communication is an exchange of deep relationship and despair, surprise and wonder. We remember here, of course, that no one is an island. Growth is impeded or else stopped. Isolation, religious communication in the new normal is clothed with the stigma of isolation and human frailty. I like that human frailty that Professor Chandra has mentioned. You mentioned human frailty, and this is actually it. Yet continues to live in the heart that feeds a treasured value of hope. You may be frail, but you cannot not be without hope. God has enabled persons to recognize the grace to never be forgotten by Him. I remember once in an interview that they made in one hospital when I gave a seminar to them, one was saying, Father, I lost faith in hope already. Because actually my parents died, my sister is now under COVID, I really lost faith. And then the other thing that I was only mentioned, but if you have lost faith, in hope, does that mean hope has lost faith in you too? Has hope lost faith in you? And she was able to answer me at once. She said, Father, I think not. Hope will never have lose faith in me. So it was a good one. I think religious communication should home into that too. Not that losing faith in hope, but hope not losing faith in us. That is actually religious communication. Therefore, as I mentioned here, narratives of experiences of death challenges us people to transform the death around us that comes. Not that the dead are brought to life like Lazarus, but that their passing away becomes for their families easier, much easier to bear. So the isolation is solved. Fifth word is actually I thirst. The fifth word is I thirst, which is actually for me a representation of exigency. The shortest among the 7 words communicates a longing satisfaction to a physical exigency. It's awareness and response to a need that is needed in religious communication at this end. Exigency actually means, what does it mean? Consents want to refer, of course, to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. When you mention needs, that one will never be lost. In 1943, the original one, 1 to 3, his original one is 1 to 3, an actualization. And in 1998, he added actually self-transcendent, actually after the self-fulfillment and actualization. She's very good here, which means even in our religious faith, in terms of self-transcendence, becomes actually probable, even in the needs. Communication and response of satisfaction, the Greek teleos, which is actually fulfillment and perfection. Later on, we'll go back to that. This one is just to show you the esteem needs, belongingness, safety, sociological needs. Okay, religious communication is awareness of connection with self, human condition. Teleos is fulfillment, becomes an excellent goal, yet always hard to attain. Human beings cannot be without weakness, limitation, or needs. Therefore, exigency will always likewise exist as human beings that we are. More plausible attitude is actually maturity. A person can be complete or mature even though he or she carries limitation. And as the famous adage says, it is much easier to be mature and still have flaws rather than be without flaws. Many are mature, but few, if any, are without flaw. So talaga namang it's be with us that for that exigency should be met. Religious communication can actually respond to it. How? In the new normal, it champions awareness of identity and response to fulfill the hierarchy of needs. It is not without its own flaws and needs. It is dynamic and continues to perfect itself. This is important, to mature. It liberates us from isolation as it informs, entertains, and educates. These are the basic definition of communication.
Father Norman, you have about 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, COVID-19, most Filipinos abide by them. Okay, the 6th word, okay, it is finished. Not yet the talk that I have, okay? It is finished. Okay, we struggle to discern the world around us. God on the cross showed us how the world understands, and also how such understanding can be meaningful and significant. Fulfillment is a sign of relief. Fulfillment of life for humanity is finished, but not its distribution, and each of us would say. So here, the fulfillment means tetelestai, it is finished. The use of the imperfect perfect tense, significant, referring to an action made yet continues. That is the one. It's actually in the perfect tense. Already done, but continues. And that's what actually the words does. That's what our communication does. It should be dynamic, a continuous one. It never stops. So it's actually punctulia, de aioris. Our present tense is actually linear. Hope is planted. Now it's our turn, nurture and harvest. I will not discuss this. Fulfillment. It's not closing or termination, but opening a door to fulfillment. And this is the one. Hope is planted, our turn to nurture. Religious communication must be rooted in the perfect tense that recognizes the reality of communication that was done, yet strains forward towards the teleos, maturity, heeding, and actually growth. 7th word, into your hands I commend my spirit. It's actually entrustment. The cross made sense of suffering, which makes it bearable. This is actually even our suffering. The task of religious communication is to help people make sense of what is happening around them, to let them feel their real worth. Entrustment, sinistao, in Greek, synonymous, commit, darkness and sun, indicative of pleasant things that are happening. Too often in our yearning to rely on God, we refuse to take responsibility for our choices. God who loves, God is the ultimate word who never dies, always trustworthy. And I commend my spirit is a kaleidoscope for me of hope, enabling constructive victory to be gained, which is actually sin afterwards. So entrustment in religious communication, normal, reminds person what and whom to trust and how communication should trust. Authentic trust is built on authentic relationship, which is what Jesus had. Communication a felt presence that nourishes. Yan, yung mga, here I included the fake news, the bad and the good, entrustment, assurement that fear and anxieties are not the last words. They already have been overcome by God. I think in every religion that is true, overcome by God. Okay, now counterculturality. This one is actually, I will skip this. I will just go to the conclusion. Okay, religious communication in the new normal strongly affirms God's relationship with creation, the balance. In tragic events like the pandemic, it invites to a perspective and attitude that is new. It empowers persons feeling isolated to a disclosure, to act and communicate their successes as well as their failures in their fulfillment. It is an invitation to an entreaty and relationship that strains forward, chained to a network of exigencies, but equally armed with an embodied network of hope. The pandemic comes as an event waiting hope and entrustment. God is always the communication hero who champions it in any religion. He is present and challenges people to affirm their human spirit, clothed with the image and likeness that is his very own. And with that, I would just like to already actually end. Ending with this, he who has a why to live can bear with almost anyhow. He who communicates with a why can bear with almost actually anyhow. So I thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this very rich and profound talk. I mean, you can spend a lot more time going to each of these different points. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time today, but let's go to some questions. Kenneth.
We have one question. We have one question,
yes,
from June Bistura. Okay. Can the Filipino concept of kapwa as shared inner self be an example or part of the new normal religious communication?
For me, it actually cannot not be. It's always part of it. It's in the I and the thou, and that's actually that duality of the identity that should always work together. And our communication, if it's only an I, it will not work actually. The communication that we have always, especially the new religious communication in the new normal, should actually be concerned, that concern of that neighborliness, and that's actually the spirit of the kapwa. So it's already there. It cannot not be missing if it is a true kapwa mentality. It's a true kapwa mentality. So I would just answer it that way, the simple one anyway.
Father Norman had a question for Chandra earlier, and the question was that the digital divide itself in the current milieu is further divided, not only about ages and generation, as was initially, but according to capacity of acquisition of technologies. Do you think it will be further divided, and under what categories? Chandra, do you want to address this question from Father Norman?
Yeah. Yes, I think that the divisions, you see, there has always been divisions which have been created because of technology. Okay, I mean throughout history actually, and I think that more and more technology comes into society. There are going to be more layers of what I would call elitism. Okay, it will be a higher level of elitism. So few years ago, we had people who did not know English, even today. Then we had those people who knew English. They were the English elite or the English-speaking elite. Then the computer came. Then they became the computer-literate elite. Then the management came. Then it became the computer-literate management elite. So you go on and on and on. So the more you infuse technology, the more you start eliminating the lower constructs of society. So you keep on creating more and more minute elites, and the larger part of the community gets left out of the system. This was actually, if you see this, this actually parallels the old caste system that we had in this country. This parallels that. You see, those people who were allowed to allowed education, those people who were allowed written knowledge, okay, they were the people who were the upper castes. It had got nothing to do with being born into a caste or anything. These were the people who had access to knowledge. What we are doing today is we are saying that just like in colonial period, the British came to this country and said that everything that is written is authentic. Everything that is oral has no value. So 90% of India's knowledge systems got invalidated simply because of this.
Mm-hmm.
Now we are creating another level of elitism, where we are saying that if you have access to technology, and that also this digital technology, then you are authentic, otherwise you are not. So those fellows who do not have access to this simply don't exist. So we are creating more and more divisions, unfortunately, and we are not even trying to figure out what the reverse solution is. We don't even want to do that. Just like in the olden times, we were happy to have the large majority of people downtrodden and a small minority who were ruling. And I think that's what's happening more and more. And we will continue to have more and more divisions in society.
I think Pope Francis has emphasized this and has really spoken against this technocratic paradigm that's really controlling the way we run the world today. And it seems that we can't imagine a world without this technocratic paradigm. But as we see what Chandra is saying is that in a lot of ways, technology is sort of displacing religion, and is in its own ways becoming its own religion. And in many ways, the way it's presenting itself, it uses a lot of this quasi-religious language. What is truly virtuous, what is truly authentic, what is truly transparency, all these ideas that come from the tech industry are using sort of the same language that religion is using. And in so many ways, it's trying to replace religion in order to create its own myth, in order to create its own sort of importance in people's lives. That's why now Google is considered God in many ways, right? And we have this, we go into Google and all we have to do is search Google is God, and there's like 2 billion entries. So there's this kind of new myth making going on in the tech industry, and it's really trying to display.
Father, yes, I agree with you entirely, but there is something else which is much more sinister that is happening, which is that by using the same language as religion, actually political forces, certain political forces are creating or are getting a handle on this whole system to lead societies to a sort of fascistic right-wing arena. And that is where it is becoming much more dangerous and much more insidious. And that is what I'm afraid of. You see, the idea of technologies coming and new myths being created, I have argued earlier, in fact, in one of the ARC conferences, that computer actually is willy-nilly creating a new orality. But this orality is being controlled in a manner that is very insidious, and that is what is frightening. Yeah,
I agree very much with that one. I think the fear also that we should avoid, we should never look at them as competitors. They should never compete. The tools and what it tries to achieve It's not to be seen like that. They should actually, again, the complementarity of it all. We should not look at it as, you are good, therefore this is bad. That has been, in 1972, there was one writer on the tools of conviviality who mentioned this very nice phrase. I always like this. He said, the degree with which you master your tools, you communicate to the world your identity. But the degree with which you are mastered by your tools, even your identity becomes that of the tools. I think it's very, very nice. And that was in 1972 when the internet was not yet tools for conviviality. And I think it is in along that line. And here we could also, that famous thing that we always say, Homo sapiens. I always believe that in terms of communication. Homo sapiens to Homo technologicus. That's where we are now. But it should not end there. I always believe there should be a third one, which is Homo Dei. That all this, are being intelligent, Homo sapiens, being rational, okay, has created the Homo technologies, which is very good. But at the end of it all, it should lead us to a recognition of who our God is, to Homo Dei. And I think religious communication should actually focus on that too, and how it can happen with values, as that all religion would have, and also with the things that it's there. Just to mention, and this is when I watched before that movie about Steve Jobs. I don't know if you watched Steve Jobs.
Yes.
When he was brought, he entered the boardroom, and then his board of directors mentioned to him, angry with him, because why were you angry? Because he wrote an article praising Microsoft. He wrote an article praising Microsoft. This I like very much. And then he said, you should never do that. And then Steve Jobs said, but what they did, their product is actually very good. And then the board of directors said, but they are competitors. You should never praise competitors. And then he said, in his simple manner, Steve Jobs, what they did was they did something good. Okay, and I praise that, what they do. And then he said, in telling something that is good about them, actually allows me to think, what can be good about me too? That would make me unique. What is it? And then he said afterwards, if they put another good product, I will actually praise it again, because it will allow me to reflect on my own, not just to tell of something that is. And at the end of that, watching that movie, I begin to realize competitions actually should never exist. It will only exist for those people who do not believe in their products. Competition should.
So let me just interrupt a little bit and give some praise to our speakers tonight, Father Stan, Dr. Yusuf, Dr. Chandra, Father Norman, and who did I miss? I missed somebody.
Dr. Cohen.
Dr. Cohen, he's left already. Thank you so much for your presence and for your participation this year. And in some ways, thanks to the pandemic that has made this gathering of people from different time zones together in the single space possible. I would just like to, before saying the final words, just to give the program for tomorrow evening. We have a second day, and so I want to give a little bit of a preview about the program tomorrow. And tomorrow we have 7 speakers actually, and we have 4 of the speakers tomorrow are women. Today we didn't have any women speakers, so we're gonna make it up tomorrow with 4 women. One from the United States, one from the Philippines, one from Ecuador in South America, and one from Singapore. And then we also have, of course, the male speakers as well. So I would like to invite us to join us again tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. Bangkok time, and that would be 8 p.m. Manila time. And so for a set of very interesting and insightful presentations tomorrow evening as well. And so right now it's 9:59. We're 29 minutes over the scheduled time. So I would like to end it here. And once again, my grateful thanks to our scholars and speakers this evening. And if it's possible for you to join us again for discussions tomorrow, you're most welcome and you're heartily invited. And of course, for those of us who are presenting and participating as discussants, please join us tomorrow evening as well. If you have further questions, you can also address to us in our email, and then we can forward it on to our speakers, and then perhaps our speakers will return with answers to your questions. It is now 10 o'clock in the evening here in Bangkok, so I would like to end it here and give God thanks and praise for this wonderful evening, and may you have a night or a day of peaceful rest or peaceful work. So God bless you. Thank you very much. See you tomorrow.